shirt should I wear tonight? She said, Marines? I said, yeah. They said, she said, wear the pink. Oh. She said, just see if you can get away with it. So what I'd like to do is use 15 or 20 minutes, and then we can use as much time as you want. If you want taking time, just a Q&A or discussion, and it's kind of like I drew the short straw. I know Cleveland back there spoke before to this group, and anybody here that's has got a story, and I just happen to be the one tonight. So thanks for inviting me. I appreciate this. And what I normally try to do if I talk with a sophisticated audience like this is talk about a few of my experiences as a fighter pilot and as a prisoner of war that I think there's some analogies to anybody in any job at any age. That's a big order, and it may not work at all, but that's my goal. And talk a little bit about leadership, or what's important in life, or teamwork, or communication. Some of those things that we all, teamwork. To run this operation, there's teamwork here. If you're married, there's teamwork. So let me just jump into those, and then I'll jump around a little bit, and then we can come back and fill it in if you want to, or just have a discussion or questions. In Vietnam, I was an old guy by the time I got there, military-wise. I was 35, and my job was a Wild Weasel pilot. Wild Weasel was a name the military Air Force gave to, I was a young major when I got there, gave to a mission that was brand new, has never been around in the history of military before, because it had to do with the Soviet Union was the first, well, they put surface-to-air missiles, SAM, surface-to-air missile, in North Vietnam. That was the first time we'd been exposed to those. And our job, there were two wars, as you know. South Vietnam was the ground war, North Vietnam, that's North. North Vietnam was the air war, DMZ, and so I was in the air war part. And we flew out of Thailand, flew across Laos, or across South Vietnam, up the Gulf of Tonkin, refueled over Laos or Vietnam, or Gulf of Tonkin, and then went into North Vietnam. And the job up there was to try to disrupt the flow of stuff to the South Vietnamese, or the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong in the South. And hopefully that war would end, and shouldn't have been there probably, but the fact is we were, and Vietnam and McNamara and Johnson were probably the most inept leaders of war I've ever known, personal opinion. But I witnessed it sitting in Hanoi for about 3 years when they stopped the bombing, and the bombing in North Vietnam was the only war there was. When they stopped the bombing, there was no leverage on North Vietnam at all. We just sat there year after year after year. So we all became a little biased about the ineptness of the war. When they put surface-to-air missiles, SAMs, in, it took away a chunk of airspace for our air war in North Vietnam. SAMs would launch off, and it took a higher altitude up here, and we started losing a bunch of, in North Vietnam, the first part of the war was carried by F-105s, a single-place fighter. They made a few two-place fighters at 105, big heavy airplane, itty-bitty wings as we call it, but it go really fast. We got to run anything. You just couldn't turn very hard for very long because you lost. Anyway, that was what I was flying. I was in it. So they said, okay, to counter these surface-to-air missiles that are shooting down some of the guys dropping bombs on bridges and POL and we'll put some black boxes in a two-place fighter and put electronic warfare officer in the back seat, an experienced pilot driver like Leo in the front seat, and we'll call them Wild Weasels, and their job will be go in first, find the SAM sites, and most of the time they're camouflaged, find the SAM sites, try to destroy them or prevent them from coming up on the radar, because then we could catch them, and then the guys could drop in the bombs, can go in and get out without losing all these airplanes. So that's what they did. First 5 105s were made into Wild Weasels. They put them up in North Vietnam, and they kind of said, okay, you guys, you flying these single-place airplanes, we'll take care of those SAMs for you. Have no fear, we're here. 45 days, all 5 of them were lost. All 5 crews of the airplane. So my backseater, Harry Johnson, and I went over there, and we were the 6th crew to get there. Well, we had a hard time getting anybody to fly with us because they knew the reputation. But what Harry and I did, there'd never been a combat against surface to air. We didn't know how to do it. Not knocking those first 5 guys. But the learning curve was real steep. So when we got there, it was about a week after the last loss, we sat down with anybody who's a wingman. When you fly in North Vietnam, here's the Weasel guy and then 3 single-place airplanes, 105F and Ds, and these guys are carrying the bombs, and they're your shooters along with you. And so we talked to anybody who survived, looked at the loss reports, and we got a yellow pad, drew a line in the middle. We said, here's what they did. We wrote down their airspeeds and their altitudes and their tactics and all that stuff. And we said, we won't do any of those. We'll do this. Well, there was nothing on this side. So it gave us a clean sheet on how to do it. And what we came up with is we said, look, these guys were relatively low airspeed or altitude and so on. Let's go into high altitude for combat up there around 18, 20,000 feet. Keep a good airspeed, good Mach, we called it. And if they launch a SAM, it'll show up on my backseater Harry's gear back there, and he's listening to it, and he's got signals, and I got one little light up front, it's red, it says launch. That's scary. Launch? I said, Harry, where, you know, but anyway, Harry was so good. And so we said, if they launch at us up here high, and if we're at 20,000 feet, the SAM's going 3,000 feet per second per 2 seconds a mile. And I said, that'll give us a time to try to set up some evasive maneuver, and if we're successful, then we can find the SAM. And evading it, I said, we can find the SAM, because it's got a contrail, it leaves in certain atmospheric conditions. If it's a dry season, it kicks up a bunch of debris where it's launched, because it's sitting like this, they launch it. So, good idea. The only problem was, first we had to evade the SAMs. And so we talked to the Fighter Weapons School in the Air Force. Those are the experts on tactics and weaponry and maneuvers. And we sent a note to the Fighter Weapons School. We said, here's our plan. We're going to go in at a high altitude, and if we get a launch light, and we get a launch, actually, I'll turn the airplane so it's on 90 degrees up here, and I'll quickly turn the airplane, it's launched over here, so now I can see it. And we'll roll the airplane inverted, and I'll call my wingman, I'll just say, our call sign was Cadillac. And they're spread, I'll call my wingman, I'll say, Cadillac, take it down. They well briefed, they knew what that meant. We all rolled there inverted. They kind of joined up on me, and I'm watching that SAM sight, and I'm looking at it over here, and I get my nose pointed just about straight down. I roll back out. We plug it in afterburner, and we get about 600 knots, 1,000 feet per second. And depending on how far out the SAM was when it launched, it'll depend on, it's got to arc down to get us, right? Because we're going straight down. And there's a word called focus. Let me tell you where I learned to focus. So, but we rolled, and we sent a note to this Twix, we call those, to the fighter weapons. Would this work? I said, we'll go just about straight down, the SAM will be arcing down at us, and if it's the very last minute before we hit the ground, we'll pull real hard. Will the SAM be able to make the corner with us? Can we survive it? And they wrote back, and these are the experts, and they said, well, we've never tried that maneuver, studied it on computers. Why don't you give it a try and let us know? And they were the experts. Kind of give it a shot. Anyway, we did that, and be darned if it didn't work. And but when you're going straight down and your ground's getting real big real fast, and you're loaded down with weapons, you have just big old heavy airplane, but you pull out of G's at 600 knots, and it's coming at when it was about 2 seconds out, 1.5 to 2 seconds out, mile and a half out. Like really coming in. I just pushed my bike button, and the guys are waiting for me. They've close formation, and they're like, come on, Leo. And I said, pull. And we pull really hard. But just right there, if you're not focused at that moment, you'll never be focused in your life. I mean, any job that anybody's got, comes time to make big decisions, and you run this a place or in your business or whatever. And then finally, there's all this stuff coming at you, but it boils down to it just at the last second. There's just a couple things really important when you're about to make that decision, whatever it is. In our case, it was just truly, life became very simple right then. 2 things to worry about, only 2 things. Don't hit the ground and don't hit the SAM. And that was it. Anyway, we did do that. It worked out pretty well. And most weasels were lost, especially early part of the war. Like I saw, 5 of the first ones are all gone. And my backseater and I, we lasted, you got to go home after 100 missions, and we lasted for 92 and a half missions, I was the best weasel pilot over there. It's that last half of that 93rd mission, and we ended up being shot down. We're just accelerated 600 knots to launch our own attack, and turned over Mountain Peak. 2 MiGs were orbiting down there, didn't see them, and they couldn't keep up with us, and they pulled up. There's a flight of 4 of us, and they fired off 2 air-to-air Russian copies of our Sidewinder, and they went up the tailpipe with me and my wing, just blew us. So we ejected, the airplane was instantly coming apart. We ejected, and my feet went straight sideways at 600 knots. Harry hurt his back badly, but the point is we survived. We were well above safe ejection speed, but we had no choice to get out now or just get eaten up with an exploding airplane. And we both survived, we both came home. Harry broke his back pretty badly. My knees were all blown out, but we made it. Floating down, just very quickly, a couple things. One is, before I was shot down, I was a Christian. I'm not here preaching. And Harry was an agnostic or an atheist. He wasn't sure what. The last thing when you took off at Takli, Thailand, just the last person you saw after your weapons were armed and your loads and your can't be taken, here was a chaplain out there, night or day, rain or shine, always a chaplain out there. And it was kind of comforting. And Harry and I had several discussions about Christianity and so on. We were taking off, hit refuel, we got some time. And Harry wasn't sure if he was an agnostic or an atheist. We came home, he is hardcore Christian still. So for him it was worth it. I didn't have to do all that, I was already a Christian, but Harry needed it. But as I was floating down, and I was close enough to Hanoi, I knew I was either going to be killed or captured when I got to the ground. And I looked around, and you're hyperventilating, I suppose, and your adrenaline's flowing. But it was late in the afternoon, it was mountainous west of Hanoi, and I looked back, and there was a little clearing in the jungle down there, and I was still probably 2,000 to 3,000 feet in the air, good crosswind, and I could see muzzle flashes. They were hiding, or shooting at me down there. Now, this is fact. It's hard to hide in a parachute. But they were bad shots or whatever. Too much. And but my thought was, when I hit the ground, I'm either going to be killed or captured. And my wife and I had friends who went over to Vietnam before. I was a attack fighter pilot for many years, so people had gone before. Some of those people had shot down, and some of those had been announced as prisoners. Some, there was no word on them. The family is tough on the family. MIAs, we all know that. And so every day they imagined they'd hear something. And I thought, if I'm killed when I hit the ground, will my family ever find out what happened to me? And the thought, that was sad, I guess, but the sad really part was, I was the pilot. I was the guy in charge of that airplane, and I'd flown 92 missions. I was the best weasel pilot by then. I'd shot down a couple of MiGs, killed more SAM. I was the lead weasel guy over there and taught other weasels, but it was my fault. I knew it was my fault. And the thought behind that was, by my mistake, I put my family in that really bad situation. It was hard to accept that I'd failed my family. Quickly skip forward. In Hanoi, I won't go through it. A fair number of aviators were tortured, significant brutality. Some died, some didn't. I was there. Times you prayed you could pass out or die. But at some point, my 18 days a night in Hanoi, and when I first got there, and we called it Heartbreak Hotel. I learned later that cell had torture cells, the knobby walls and hooks and stuff. I broke. I went past name, rank, serial number, date of birth. Now, for me, at least, it was harder for me to fail me than it was my family. Even. That was the worst moment of my life. I'll never forget it. That I thought, because I knew some people ahead of me, and I thought, I bet they made it, and I didn't. You know, they were the tough guys. But it turned out later, I found out that everybody who went through that type of interrogation, they either broke or they died, and some did both. So that's all about that. Quickly on communications, you've probably all heard of the TAP code. The TAP code, when you're in Hanoi, when you're a prisoner of war, I shouldn't say just, but in prison, you have to communicate if times are really tough, because sometimes your life truly depended upon knowing what's going on in the camp, or the guy that was tortured yesterday, and it's going to be your turn tomorrow, what he said, what kind of torture all those kinds of things. So we developed a TAP code. And by the way, there were 350 POWs, all aviators, known alive in the system up there for several years when Johnson stopped bombing and so on. And 2/3 of us were Air Force, and there were about a third Navy. That was just the ratio of where all aviators. And there were 5 Marines, close to air support Marines, close to DMZ and so on. And so with that TAP code, what it was is, very quickly, you lined it up, 5 rows we threw away the letter K. Could have been any letter, but we threw away a letter K. If we wanted to send a word with a K in it, we use a C. And you'd know from context that it was a K, okay? So we like A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J. There's no K, so the third row starts with L, M, N, O, P, so there's 25 letters, right? So to tap my initial, LT, would sound like this. You know where the L is? It's the first row down, the third row down, the first one, isn't it? Oh, sorry. That's L, right? T would be, it happens to be 4-4, okay? At night, when you were, those tough years, 3 years were solitary, a lot of solitary, and times were 3 years of brutality and 3 years of boredom, kind of solitary or 2 or 3 in a cell, big difference. But when the times were real tough at night in those first 3 years, if you could get to your wall at night, you would tap this. If you figure it out, you'd find out the second row, that'd be a G, right? Then the next letter you tap is, first row, second one would be a B, wouldn't it? GB, last row would be GBU, God bless you. And the guy in the cell there said if he weren't in stocks, sometimes your stocks you couldn't get to the wall, but if you could get to the wall, then if he weren't in stocks and he'd get back and if you do it quietly, because if the guard hears you, they beat you. No sound, any sound, they beat you. And the guy, he would at GBU, GN. It was very comforting to know there was that American, see 12 inches of concrete or what it was right there. That was, and also, if you can communicate, you can organize. And if you can organize, you can resist, or at least resist better. So community is absolutely essential, and that became, by the way, anybody here got some Air Force background in them? Or, yes, if you and I were communicating, we could communicate at about 15 words a minute. And if I were communicating, if you were Navy, sir, I would slow down to about 12.
And if you were a Marine?
If you're a Marine, the 5 Marines, we didn't bother to teach them. No, that's not true.
So the big hands on 12, the little on 4.
I had to say it. Just very quickly, a little bit on teamwork. Teamwork is so critical. I mentioned it before, but I just want to reiterate it because it's critical. Three levels. I just go down 3 levels. First layers was the ground people. We're yanking and banking the airplane right up to the limits of the envelope. Sometimes a little beyond it. Flak holes coming back, stress, and the big old heavy airplanes. And those crew chiefs and those everybody on the ground they worked all night long. By morning, they gave us just about a brand new airplane. Just phenomenal the way they worked. Secondly, the wingmen was the second level of the team I want to mention. And they had, I guess so I could pick my own, they were generally, I picked young guys who didn't know any better. And young lieutenants, they were great. And people who would drive their nose through a couple layers of flak, who could fly good formation, could protect your six, could put bombs on target. I picked the best I could get, and they were just outstanding. And then every team's got a key member. I'd like to say that was me, but I just kind of pointed at the airplane where I thought it should be. My backseater, Harry Johnson, he knew electronics so well. He could tell me what an antenna looked like by listening to the North Vietnamese antenna signals. And he got us out of trouble sometimes before we ever got in trouble. And the point being, if all levels of that team, like in any business, if you had a good team, you generally succeed. If you got a bad team, the odds are you're going to lose money or fail, whatever you do. But in our case, the results were significant because if all levels of the team did a really good job, the odds are we were successful that day. We won that day. We killed some SAM sites. If any one of the levels of that team failed, the odds are we were either dead or prisoners of war. I mean, serious business is teamwork. So I just stress that. I don't know if it's worthy of mention, but most of us in this room are pretty well set in our careers, and some of us got grandkids and great grandkids or whatever. So maybe there's that lesson to pass on or something. What's important in life? The last 3 years we were there, we got outside most days, pour a bucket of water over ourselves. We got so we could talk out loud. Some of the windows had the bricks taken out of them. They put 20, 30, 40, one time there was 43 of us in a cell. I mean, it was so much, we could talk out loud now. And mostly it was during this time where the bombing pause had stopped and we were just there. And, waiting for something to happen. And we got to know these people that we tapped to before, never knew what they looked like. And I kind of lost my chain of thought there. But somebody brought up, while I was in a big cell, I lived with Mike Christian. Some of you here know the name Mike Christian. He was from Huntsville, yes. And I'd forgotten that, so I moved here. And then when I got here, I realized that his brother at that time was a captain on the fire department. A neat family. And Mike and I became the best of friends in a big cell. And I've said to many people, if you ever go to prison, go with Mike Christian. I mean, he truly was a neat guy. And Mike was a good-looking guy. He was a young naval aviator. Didn't hold it against him. But those last 3 years, we had, and I'll come back to what's important in life. I picked that up in my mind. But the last 3 years, we taught school. We didn't have any books. We didn't have pencils. But how do you pass time? You got 20, 30, 40 people. Whoever knew the most about any subject taught the subject, and people would sign up. They may stick with you for a couple of days. They'd hear somebody down the other end. If that's a better course, they go down there. But so one of the things they taught was language. All the people who had been through the academies had to take Spanish, or some language, Russian, German, Spanish. Spanish was kind of normal. So we decided, I forget who was a naval aviator who taught Spanish anyway. So Mike and I were a couple of people signed up for the Spanish class. And we got serious about it. We learned how to conjugate verbs, and we tried to memorize things. We had no books or pencils. We go over and over. And Mike and I so we'd sit down in the corner, and we'd speak Spanish to each other. Turned out about 40% of the words that the teachers remembered were real words. About 60% of the words, they couldn't remember the name. for the verb or the noun or whatever it was. So we just made one up, and then that became the word we used. It was just simple. An example, we had it's not being crass, but when we lived in the big cells, you walk up and there's a hole in the floor, you put your feet here, and there's a bucket, a barrel underneath it. Once every day or two, pull the barrel, we'd chuggy that barrel out and waste, and human waste, we'd dump it in a sewer. But we didn't, so when Mike and I were talking about the head, and we said, well, what do we call that? So we went to the experts, and they didn't know, so it became El Crapola. And it was, but it worked. But anyway, Mike and I got, so we spent a lot of time just passing time speaking Spanish. We came home, and there's not one Spaniard in the entire world would have any idea what we're talking about. But what's important in life, one of the things I did in the big cells is I decided I'm not going to talk to anybody, I'm just going to listen. That was hard for me. But for about 2 weeks, I just listened. And mentally, I made myself a little file cabinet, a little piece of paper, and a metal pencil, and every time I'd hear it, so I said, I'm going to keep track of what we talk about. What subjects do we talk about? What topics?